Obviously, you've seen what's going on in California. But the governor gave this creepy fucking speech where he was talking about speculators coming in and talking about what to do with the land of all these homes that have been burnt down while it's still only 6% contained. And he did this little dance like, I've been talking with the governor of Hawaii about what to do. We've got some ideas. A speculator, we're going to have some.
Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld did not hold back when they went after California Governor Gavin Newsom. The moment they turned their attention to him, it wasn't just a regular political discussion and turned into a full-blown takedown. Rogan hit. First, speaking in his calm, direct voice, but every word he said hit like a punch. He didn't need to shout or exaggerate. He just laid out the facts and his own experience. Rogan left California. He didn't move quietly either. He packed his studio, left behind the chaos, and headed to Texas. And when he talked about why, he didn't mince words. He explained how California had turned into a place where common sense didn't work anymore. The rules made no sense. Small businesses were crushed, but huge corporations were left untouched. People lost their homes, their lives were turned upside down, and yet the leadership didn't seem to care. Rogan pointed out how Newsom acted during the COVID lockdowns. While the average person was stuck at home trying to follow the rules, Newsom was caught dining in one of the fanciest restaurants without a mask. He lied and said he was outside, but the truth came out. And the truth was that he believed the rules didn't apply to him. That's what made people angry. Not just the rules, but the fact that the people who made the rules didn't follow them. Rogan made it clear he didn't trust that kind of leadership. He said people don't believe in Newsom. He's not a real leader. It's a fake version of one. A cardboard cutout pretending to be something more. And that's why people are leaving California, not because of the weather, but because of the leadership. Then Greg Gutfeld jumped in, and he brought his own style. Where Rogan was calm and serious, Gutfeld was sharp and funny, but just as deadly. He called Newsom a performance artist. He mocked how Newsom looked perfect, spoke perfectly, but behind the scenes, California was falling apart. Homeless camps were growing, businesses were closing, and families were struggling. But Newsom always seemed to be smiling, acting like everything was fine. Gutfeld described him as a man who walked into a disaster zone with a grin on his face, talking about climate plans while everything around him burned. They didn't just criticize his appearance or his speeches. They exposed the deep problems caused by his leadership. Rogan reminded everyone how fire insurance companies left California because of bad management. He said people couldn't even get coverage anymore because the state wasn't doing enough to prevent fires. It wasn't just about nature, it was about failed policy. Then Newsom had the nerve to smile and talk about land use plans while standing in front of burned homes. That moment, Rogan said, was all anyone needed to see. A man more focused on image than action. Gutfeld, with his usual sharp tone, compared Newsom to a fashion model on a runway, pretending he was fixing problems while just posing for cameras. He joked that Newsom looked like he was created in a lab for politicians. But behind the perfect hair and polished words was a failing state. He said California looked like a mix of a spa and a war zone. 10 cities next to juice bars. Crime rising while politicians gave speeches about progress. It wasn't just hypocrisy, it was failure, dressed up in nice clothes. The two men weren't just making fun. They brought facts and examples. They showed how Newsom's policies made it harder for people to live in California. Blackouts were common. People were told to buy electric cars, then asked not to charge them because the power grid couldn't handle it. Gas stoves were banned. While people cooked dinner by flashlight, didn't make sense. And that was the point Rogan and Gutfeld kept making. California had become a place where leadership meant telling people what to do, not solving real problems. Rogan also pointed out how Newsom launched a podcast to boost his image instead of focusing on the problems people were facing. While families were struggling to rebuild after wildfires, Newsom's podcast didn't even mention the disaster. Instead, it was all about him. That was what really upset people. He wasn't leading. He was promoting himself. Rogan said he didn't need to scream about it. The facts were enough, and people saw through it. Gutfeld went deeper. He called out the media for treating Newsom like a star. He joked that Newsom looked like he belonged in a cologne ad. Behind the glamour was chaos. Gutfeld pointed out how legacy media praised Newsom's leadership while regular people couldn't afford rent or groceries. He said it was like watching a movie trailer that looked amazing, but the film itself was a disaster. Then came the topic of Newsom's possible presidential run. Both Rogan and Gutfeld couldn't believe it. They asked, how can someone who can't manage a state think he can run a country? Gutfeld laughed at the idea, saying it was like trying to open more branches of a restaurant that already failed. It wasn't just funny, it was serious. They were warning people. This wasn't just a bad leader. This was someone trying to bring his broken model to the national stage. Rogan said when people hear Newsom talk, it's like listening to someone who's acting. He called him a creation, not a real person. He said real leaders, like Trump or RFK Jr., might have their faults, but at least they're real. Newsom? He said was a smooth-talking illusion. And Gutfeld backed it up, showing clips and pointing out how carefully Newsom's image was managed. They even joked about how his speeches were filmed so you couldn't see his hands, like he was hiding something. They brought up the climate policies too. Newsom talks a lot about going green, but his actions don't match. California's power grid is weak. Blackouts happen often, and people are punished with high energy prices. Meanwhile, politicians drive by in government cars while telling everyone else to cut back. It's not about saving the planet, they said. It's about saving face. It's about looking good, not doing good. And then there's the issue of crime and homelessness. Gutfeld said you can walk through parts of California and feel like you're in a post-apocalyptic movie. Yet Newsom still gets praised. He mocked how the city was cleaned up right before a foreign leader's visit. But not for the people who live there every day. That's the kind of leadership people are tired of. It's not real, it's all for show. Both Rogan and Gutfeld agreed on one thing: people aren't dumb. They see through the act. They know when they're being lied to. They know when a politician is more concerned about headlines than helping. And that's what Gavin Newsom has become. They said, a headline, a performance, not a real leader. Rogan, who lived in California and saw the problems firsthand, said he didn't just leave because he wanted to change. He left because he had to. The state no longer worked for people like him. And Gutfeld added that more people were leaving too. It wasn't just about taxes or politics. It was about trust. And people had lost trust in the man leading their state. They also talked about how Newsom changes his stance when it's convenient. He once bragged that California would be a sanctuary for everyone. But now he's backing away from that message. He's trying to distance himself from the very ideas he once supported. It's not leadership, they said. It's marketing. Gutfeld's final blow was about Newsom's national dreams. He said the idea that Newsom could fix the country was laughable. How can someone who failed in one place suddenly have the answers for everywhere else? It's not possible. And Rogan added that even though they come from different styles, one a podcast host, the other a political comedian, they both reached the same conclusion. Newsom isn't solving problems. He's covering them up. They didn't just attack Newsom for fun. They were warning people. They were saying, look at the truth. Look past the hair and the suits. Look at what's really happening. Because behind the perfect image is a man who, in their view, has made life harder for millions. And if he gets more power, the problems could spread. In the end, the message was clear. It wasn't just about California. It was about leadership, honesty, and the need for people who actually care about solving problems. Rogan and Gutfeld might have different styles, but when it came to Newsom, they were united. And their voices, each powerful in their own way, made sure the truth was heard loud and clear. Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld didn't just stop at personal attacks or political jokes. They went further and began connecting the dots, showing how Gavin Newsom's decisions impacted real people in very real ways. Rogan emphasized how the wildfire disaster under Newsom's leadership wasn't just some natural tragedy, it was made worse by bad policies. He pointed out that California had cut funding to fire prevention programs and allowed overgrown brush to pile up in fire-prone areas. Insurance companies had already started pulling out because they didn't trust the state's management anymore. When fires struck, thousands of homes were lost and families were left with nothing. And instead of addressing the failures, Newsom stood in front of the cameras, talking about development plans with a smile on his face. That image stayed in people's minds, not because it was inspiring, but because it was out of touch with reality. Gutfeld jumped in by painting an even clearer picture. He described how California had become a land of double standards. People living in tent cities were steps away from luxury boutiques. Small businesses were boarded up while billion-dollar corporations thrived under government favors. Neighborhoods were declining, crime was rising, and residents were paying more for everything from gas to groceries, while leaders like Newsom smiled for magazine covers. Gutfeld's voice cut through the noise with humor, but the facts beneath the jokes were hard to ignore. He joked that Newsom looked like the main character of a political version of a cologne ad. Perfect hair, perfect smile, and nothing behind it but air. Rogan kept returning to the idea of realness. He said that even if you don't agree with someone like Trump or RFK Jr., you can at least see that they are real people. They show emotion, they face their critics, and they don't hide behind filters or handlers. But Newsom, Rogan said, was more like a machine, always polished, always scripted, and never showing what's really going on. That's why people don't trust him. It's not just about politics anymore. It's about being able to believe the person in charge actually means what they say. As the conversation continued, the pair highlighted Newsom's responses during the COVID-19 pandemic. Gutfeld reminded viewers how strict the rules were for everyone else, while Newsom continued to live his life with special privileges, parties, dinners, maskless public appearances. It was all there. And people noticed. They didn't forget. That's why the damage wasn't just about policy, it was about credibility. Gutfeld said it's hard to respect a leader who creates one set of rules for the public and a completely different one for himself and his friends. They also didn't shy away from the topic of homelessness, which has grown worse in California under Newsom's watch. Rogan explained that the problem wasn't just big, it was out of control. Entire communities were living on sidewalks, in parks, under bridges. And Newsom, instead of addressing the root causes, kept talking about how much money was being spent. But where did that money go? The results didn't match the promises. Rogan, who once lived in the state, had seen the decay himself. And Gutfeld added that every time the issue was brought up, Newsom responded with polished lines, not real solutions. They brought attention to how Newsom's climate policies, while sounding good, were failing in practice. Rolling blackouts, restrictions on energy use, and rules that punished regular families, all while the government acted like they were saving the planet. Gutfeld mocked how Californians were told to buy electric cars, then told not to charge them during peak hours. It wasn't leadership, was theater, was all about the performance, not the result. Then came the tech exodus. Big companies, small startups, even individuals with creative careers, many left California because of high taxes, strict regulations, and unstable living conditions. Rogan himself was part of that wave. He moved his life and business to Texas, not because it was trendy, but because it became necessary. He said the state he once loved had become unlivable. And Gutfeld pointed out that people weren't just leaving for fun, they were fleeing. When tech giants and middle-class families are making the same decision, something has clearly gone wrong. Rogan said the final straw for many wasn't one policy or one scandal. It was the constant feeling that the government was disconnected. From the people, leaders like Newsom weren't listening. They were performing. They were giving speeches and taking photos, but not solving problems. That's why people started looking elsewhere for leadership. They turned to voices like Rogan, Gutfeld, and others who were willing to speak out even if it wasn't popular. And then came the biggest insult to Californians. Newsome launched a podcast. While people were trying to recover from fires, find jobs, and rebuild their lives, the governor decided it was the perfect time to start a show about himself. He didn't mention the fires. He didn't talk about the insurance problems. He talked about his image. Rogan and Gutfeld tore this apart. They said it was the clearest sign yet that Newsom wasn't focused on the people, he was focused on promotion. Gutfeld added that Newsom's fans in the media kept praising him for being bold and forward-thinking. But they never showed the real California. It's the part where stores were closing, kids weren't safe, and families were leaving in record numbers. Gutfeld said the media was helping sell a fantasy version of California that didn't exist. And that made it even harder for real people to get help, because their struggles were being hidden behind a curtain of praise and press releases. The two agreed that the scariest part of all this was the growing talk about Newsom running for president. They said it showed just how broken the political system had become. A man who had failed his own state might be rewarded with a chance to lead the country. That, they said, was madness. Rogan said the people deserve better, not just in California, but everywhere. Leaders should be honest, real, and ready to face problems. Head on, not run from them with a selfie and a speech. Gutfeld's last big moment came when he compared Newsom's leadership to running a restaurant. He said if your kitchen is full of rats, you don't open 5 more locations. You fix the kitchen. But Newsom wasn't fixing anything. He was franchising failure. He was trying to sell the nation the same empty promises that had already hurt millions in California. Gutfeld said it was dangerous, and it was up to the people to see through it. Both Rogan and Gutfeld ended with the same message. This isn't about being left or right. It's not about political teams. It's about truth. And the truth is, Gavin Newsom has failed as a leader. He has prioritized image over action and performance over people. The problems in California are real. The people suffering are real, and the excuses no longer work. They weren't just talking to criticize. They were trying to wake people up, to make them pay attention, because the decisions made by people like Gavin Newsom don't just stay in one state. They spread. They shape the future. And if no one calls it out, that future could look a lot worse. That's why Rogan and Gutfeld spoke out, not to score points, but to speak the truth. Because sometimes the truth is the only thing that can break through the noise.